Hey guys, Frosted Knives here, back with another book review. Today we are going to be reviewing the second in a series of reviews of the Bachman books. Today we are going to be reviewing the first Bachman book in this collection, and that is Rage. Rage clocks in at about 160 pages. It's not the shortest of the Bachman books. I do believe The Running Man may be the shortest, but I believe this is the second shortest Bachman book at 160 pages. And Rage is an interesting story, is an interesting thing to get into. So, Rage is one of the earliest novels that was written by Stephen King. Stephen King wrote Rage. The original title of Rage was called Getting It On. Rage was written when Stephen King was a senior in high school in 1969. He put it away, completed it in 1970 or 71-ish, and then tried to get it published and didn't get published, so he kind of put it in the trunk of unpublished stories. But Rage is an interesting story because the protagonist, or the main character in Rage, is a 15-year-old high school student. So Stephen King wrote basically his own demographic. He was a senior in high school when he wrote a story about a highly disturbed 15-year-old kid in high school. And Rage is the only book, I do believe, the only book that Stephen King has allowed to go out of print. Rage is not in print anymore, and Stephen King made the decision to let Rage go out of print after Sandy Hook, after the school shootings really started getting traction, and it started happening more and more. And as a result of that, Stephen King felt it was the responsible thing, not necessarily that he felt stories like this were reasons why those types of events happen, but he felt it was the responsible thing to just let Rage go out of print. So no new copies of Rage are being printed. If you want to get a copy of Rage, you have to find an older version. Have to get a used version or something older. You won't get one new in print. So Rage is an interesting Bachman book. It's an interesting Stephen King story. It's not one of the best Stephen King stories. It's not one of the most well-written Stephen King stories. But I think it is potentially one of the most honest Stephen King stories. So, Rage is about a 15-year-old student at Placerville High named Charles Everett Decker. And basically, one day, Charlie goes to school with a gun, and he decides to get it on. And what that means is he winds up going into a classroom and shooting the classroom teacher, and then shooting another teacher that tries to sort of intervene, and then more or less holding the students in the classroom hostage for the day. Mostly, I think it's the morning, from about 9 o'clock or so until about 1, and holds them hostage so that he can get it on with the students. And what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean when Charlie says he wants to get it on? It basically turns into for want of a better term, a group therapy session. So after the initial shooting of the two teachers, and then the lockdown of the school, and then Charlie holding the kids hostage, we begin to have discussions. And we begin to learn about Charlie, and we begin to learn about the other students. And we begin to learn about why Charlie's doing what he's doing. It's sort of like a really demented version of The Breakfast Club. Now, if you know about The Breakfast Club, this was written way before The Breakfast Club. But The Breakfast Club was basically a bunch of outcasts that wound up having detention, people that really didn't interact with each other, and then over the course of this detention, they started sharing stories and became friends. This is a demented version of that. Charlie wants to get it on. And he wants to talk about things. And wants to talk about skeletons in the closet. And wants to talk about the things that people hold secrets. The things that lurk in the dark recesses of your mind. And we learn about Charlie's past and about why he may be doing what he's doing. We heard about Charlie's abusive father, who was a military man who physically abused Charlie and will lie to Charlie's mother about it, say that it never happened. We hear about Charlie's getting bullied by other students, but we also hear about Charlie's psychopathy, about how Charlie's feelings are and mental leanings are twisted and what goes on in Charlie's head. And over the course of the story, we hear about the other students in the class. They begin to share stories with each other. Stories about sex, stories about being bullied, stories about mental health issues, stories about bad home life. They're almost bonding over this incident. Charlie is almost making these students bond with each other and with him. And that's what getting it on, I guess, in Charlie's mind is all about. Getting the skeletons out of the closet. Talking about the things you don't want to talk about. Talking about the things that are getting stuffed down until you can't stuff them down anymore. Bringing it all out into the open so that you could potentially be maybe a better person or do things differently. At the end of the book, Charlie lets the kids go. And a cop, one of the guidance counselor, is it a guidance counselor or a cop? A cop comes down to collect Charlie. Charlie winds up getting shot 3 times. He's basically unarmed at this point. He gets shot. And he winds up in a psychiatric ward, unfit to stand trial for murders. He's in a psychiatric ward. And so that's more or less rage. And where does the rage come in? A lot of it's centered around Charlie and the rage he has towards his father and the anger that he has towards his father about the way he treats him, the way he treats his mother. But he also has, rage about bullies and the way the educational system may work and the teachers in the high school and all the things that teenagers have rage about. How they're being treated by their parents, how they're being treated by their peers, how they're viewed by their teachers, by guidance counselors, by people that try to pigeonhole them into being something that they're not. How they try to fit people into boxes and try to explain behaviors. It's not one of the best written books. The language can be flowery. It can be overly wordy. But I think it's raw. And I think it's honest. It may be one of the most honest things that Stephen King ever wrote. I mean, let's face it. He was writing about his own demographic. And a lot could be said about this book. I think part of the shock value of this book is that it was written at a time where these things weren't commonplace. It wasn't commonplace to have school shootings in the 70s, in the early 70s. It wasn't commonplace to do the kinds of things that Charlie did in these books. Sadly, it's commonplace now. So when you read it now, you don't get the full shock value that I think you would have gotten 35, 40 years ago. Because unfortunately, these things are commonplace. School shootings, children getting hurt, all this terrible, terrible stuff that's going on. More and more we hear about it. So when you read a book like Rage, I don't think it affects you as it should, or as it did back then. Because we become numb to this stuff. It's just another book about another school shooting. Stuff we've already heard. Stuff that's already been covered in the news. But at the time, it was probably pretty shocking stuff. This was written before I was born, so clearly I don't have a point of reference. I would have read this probably when I first read this book, I was probably a teenager. This is when I read most of Stephen King's books. So it's not, it doesn't really stand the test of time, per se. I found Charlie and the situation to be very sad and very depressing. If this book was written in today's market, in today's culture, in today's society, it would be a completely different animal. Because the things that are in this book don't really sort of exist anymore. This authoritarian rule, teachers and parents not really talking about the mental health of students. I mean, there's a lot more. It's a lot more open now. There's a lot more talk about therapy and counseling and mental health issues in schools now than it was back then. Back then, it was a lot more heavy-handed. So it would be a completely different animal if it was written today. But the interesting thing about this book that I think about Rage is how autobiographical is this book? And what I mean by that is you can clearly tell that it was written from a very raw, very honest, very angry point of view. And so Stephen King, at the ripe old age of probably 18, was writing about a troubled 15-year-old in high school. So as you begin to read the story, you begin to start asking your questions like, who's really asking for help? Is Charles Everett Decker in Rage asking for help? Or is Stephen King asking for help? Is this a story about Charles Everett Decker and his abusive father and bullies in school and the rage this kid feels to the father in the story and to the kids in the story? Or is this a story about Stephen King and the anger that he feels at his father, who left his mother with 2 children at a young age, who left him, who left his brother, who left his mom, and the anger that he feels? I mean, this is clearly a story about a person whose deep-rooted rage is completely centered on the father figure of the book. How autobiographical is this? And that's why I think it's honest, because I think it really is autobiographical. I think Stephen King is really writing from a place that he can relate, dealing with issues, anger issues, maybe towards his own dad, things he couldn't say to his father, wish that he could say, he's saying through Charlie. Things that he wished he could say to the people that maybe did bad things to him, the rage that he feels that he maybe not be able to express, he's expressing through his writing. And that's why I think Rage is one of the more honest pieces that Stephen King has written. It's not the best. It's not the best crafted. It's not his finest work, not the best crafted work. No one's going to teach how to write by telling people to read Rage. No one's going to teach people how to write grammatically by teaching people, go read Rage. But for the pure emotion that it conveys, it does its job, I think, and it does its job well. And we don't really know why Charlie is doing what he's doing, because the book sort of asks these questions. Is Charlie doing these things because he's got an abusive dad? Is Charlie doing these things because he's bullied? Is Charlie doing these things because the teachers don't understand him and the teachers are trying to hold him down? Or is he doing these things because Charlie really is psychopathic, a sociopath? Is he doing these things because there's something really wrong with Charlie? Is he wired funny? We don't get clear answers to these questions. They're all left open. We still don't have clear answers to these questions when we ask people that, when we find out why do people do what they do. Why does Charlie do what Charlie does? It's very cathartic for Charlie to get out and to get it on and to get all these secrets out in the open. Is it because of the abuse? Is it because of the bullying? Or is it because Charlie's just wired wrong? I mean, there are things in the book, thought patterns and things that Charlie says that he thinks about that clearly make you believe that Charlie is wired wrong, that there's something wrong in Charlie's head, that he's a sociopath. But is he a sociopath because of his environment, or is he a sociopath because he was born that way? Is it nature versus nurture? Is it environment versus genetics? Tackles some of those questions, and we're still trying to tackle those questions in the real world even now. So there's no clear-cut answers. The reader is left to make their own decisions. Is he psychopathic? Was he just a victim of bullying? Is it a combination? We don't know. We don't really know what Charlie's motives is because Charlie is telling the story. And Charlie is an unreliable narrator because Charlie is clearly coming from a place where he has deep-rooted psychotic issues. So Charlie's not all that reliable of a narrator. We only have Charlie's word for what happened in his past. And is Charlie's father was really abusive? Did those things really happen? We don't know. Because all we have is Charlie's word, and Charlie is unreliable. But I did say, I think in a previous video, that Rage was my favorite. And I came back to it, and, you know, it's good, but I just couldn't get there. And maybe it's because it's 35 years later. Maybe it's because of an age thing. Maybe it's because of what's gone on in the world. I don't know. But I do think it's honest. And any work that is honest is good. I think Stephen King was writing from a position of honesty, maybe his own pain, maybe his own rage, his own feelings. Maybe he was trying to sort out his own feelings as a teenager because he was 17, 18 when he wrote this. Maybe he was trying to deal with his own issues. But the one thing that Rage is honest. And because of that, I say you should read it. I gave it a 3-star on Goodreads, and I think I'm going to stick by that. So that's my review of Rage. It is raw, and above all, it is honest, and you can't fault anybody. If there's honesty in someone's craft, honesty in someone's work, in their art, then that is art, and that is good, and then that is a good thing, because a lot of times there isn't honesty in this kind of stuff. There's an honesty in art. People aren't coming from a place where they want to talk about these things. So Rage is definitely a good read. Good luck finding it. And, you know, I don't think, neither does Stephen King, and I don't think that reading this kind of stuff is going to turn you, or turn anybody, into a school shooter. But like I said, Stephen King did the reliable thing, and it's out of print. So that is my review of Rage, the first in this of the Bachman books. We already covered the second of the Bachman books, which was The Long Walk. Now we're on to the third of the Bachman books, which is Roadwork. And that is Stephen King's least favorite. Stephen King said that was a story that tried too hard and he didn't like it. So we're going to read that next. It's a rather long one, and we're going to review that next. So guys, that is my review of Rage by Stephen King / Dickie Bachman. So guys, as always, thanks for watching. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, share the video, thumbs up, like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.